Thank you to these companies and organizations that make the Before I Die New Mexico Festival possible. A good goodbye, Gail Rubin puts the fun in funeral planning. Compassion and choices, improving care, expanding options, and empowering everyone to chart their end-of-life journey. Daniel's Family Funerals and Cremations, Fairview Memorial Park, Gabaldon Mortuary, Sandia Memory Gardens, and Vista Verde Memorial Park, all in the Albuquerque area. Estate Pros, offering professional dispersal of personal possessions due to a move, illness, or death. The Final Exit Network, educating about and defending the right to choose at end of life. French Funerals and Cremations and Sunset Memorial Park in Albuquerque. Gathering Us, providing in-person and virtual memorial services and online memorial pages. Keeper, providing hybrid and virtual memorial services and keeping memories alive with online tributes to preserve, celebrate, and share life legacies. Morris Hall, estate planning attorneys in New Mexico and Arizona. Remembering a Life, your guide to honoring a life well lived, from planning a tribute to mourning a loved one. And Retirement Extender, investment management services with a personalized strategy recommendation based on your needs and objectives. Welcome to today's session with Monica Torres with NXT Mortuary Support, and she's coming to us from the Cold Hands Death Education Studio. Hello, Monica.
Hello, here we are in Phoenix, Arizona. Welcome to my prep room.
I am so excited to be talking with you about behind the scenes in the prep room. Monica, can you first give us a little background about how you got involved as becoming an embalming expert? And what is the term Desairologist?
Yeah, you got it right.
Hey.
You got it right. Yes, absolutely. I'd love to be able to share that with you. Here we are in our safe space in our studio here at Cold Hands Death Education Studio, where we can share all this information with each other in a comfortable and inviting environment. So yes, I got into the business like, I guess most people that you'll hear funeral directors, they suffer their own loss in their life and were impacted by the funeral director, the experience. And that happened to me on a couple of different occasions. So first being my father, who passed away, and he was killed in a tragic mining accident and completely disfigured, which has led me to move down this path in my own career as a reconstructive specialist. And then when I was in high school, when I was in college, my grandmother passed away. And that experience was deeply moving for me. We worked with the funeral director to offer a family assisted dress for her. And so that really changed my perspective on like what death is and how the grief process works. And I realized, I thought, you know, if I can do this for my own grandma, I feel like I can do this for other people too. So here I am, 20 years later, and I love doing what I do. I love helping families, and I love helping other funeral professionals as well, guiding both families and professionals down that path, whether it's down a grief journey of their own or a professional journey that they're on to comfort and care for the dead, comfort the living and care for the dead.
How did you get trained to become an embalming expert?
So I went to traditional mortuary college, but before that, I was a cosmetologist for many years. So I've been licensed in cosmetology since I was 17 years old, really. I went to cosmetology school while I was still in high school. And so I've been working on human bodies since I was about 16 years old. It just evolved over time to working on people that weren't alive anymore in my 30s. So once I applied for mortuary college and I was accepted, I went down that path and that journey, completed mortuary college, got my license to embalm and funeral direct. And then I pursued a higher education with the Fountain National Academy of Professional Embalming Skills, which is a postgraduate program for people, professionals who want to gain a little bit higher skill level and really master the art of embalming. And so here I am now.
And you provide services to other funeral homes and training to other embalmers.
That's
Correct?
right. I help families. I do guide families online, and I am a constant resource for the public, but I do help other funeral homes. I am considered a specialist in my field. And so typically when there's a funeral home that needs staff support, or they simply have a case that they need a person that has more qualifications, that has a higher skill level, they will call me to come in and work on those really difficult cases. So I'm really honored to be able to do that for my funeral home clients and for the families that need that kind of special care.
Yes. Hair and makeup for the dead.
Yeah, it's a big thing.
It is a big thing, and we're going to learn more about that in our conversation today and share with our audience. Why don't we talk a little bit about what is embalming and a little bit about the history of embalming in the United States?
Well, I'll let you actually tell us who the Father of Embalming is. Every funeral director and embalmer knows the answer to this question, but I'm willing to bet that you know it too.
Yes, Thomas Holmes is considered the father of American embalming, and he was set up on battlefields during the Civil War to embalm soldiers who were killed. And there was actually an outreach during the Civil War where people would go and sell certificates, primarily to Northern families who could afford this, to have a fallen soldier embalmed and shipped back to their hometown.
So it was like the first pre-need that people could actually purchase, right? That was the first like planning for your funeral. That's amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so what would happen is if someone died on the battlefield, and they would go and they would check inside their uniform to see if one of these certificates was pinned inside, and then they would know that their family had prepaid to have them embalmed and shipped back home. And very interesting. But
Which
embalming,
really,
yes.
Yeah, which is really absolutely, it's not only interesting, but I think it's a testament to how embalming has become America's favorite death tradition, really. Because during the Civil War, there was so many soldiers that had been killed on the battlefield. Bodies were laying everywhere. They couldn't bury them all. Mm-hmm. And so during that time, when they figured out how to embalm and how to preserve the body, because that's actually what embalming is, many people don't know what it is. Embalming is preservation, disinfection, and restoration of the dead human body. So through those preservative processes that embalming does provide us, families were able to see their loved ones months after they had succumbed on the battlefield. And back then, embalming was extremely valuable because many times families would only get a hand back. They might get a leg, they might get a foot, but that tissue was preserved through the embalming process, that they were actually able to get their loved one's hand, their foot, maybe their head. If they were lucky, they would get the whole entire body. But that's when embalming really, really started to take off. It was a huge innovation at the time, because before then, loved ones were just lost to time. They were lost and then decomposed on the battlefield and never seen again.
Well, and another part of history where embalming played a big part was after Abraham Lincoln's assassination, he was embalmed, and then his body went on this long train trip all around the country to his burial in Springfield, Illinois. And in fact, we have another session during the Before I Die Festival where Colby Hitchcock is going to give an overview about Abraham Lincoln and his embalming and its impact on American funeral service. I believe actually America is like the world leader in terms of using embalming.
Yes, absolutely. And President Lincoln was responsible for that. Now, because he was such a high profile person being our president, he understood the values of embalming, and he actually had his own embalming surgeon come in that he actually hired himself before his death. So he already knew who he was going to have embalm him. But I like, when I teach my classes and I'm teaching community outreach classes, I always like to compare that likeness and the popularity that President Lincoln had and his exposure to the likeness of the Kardashians. Okay, so if you think back, okay, to President Lincoln, and he chose, I'm going to do this, right, with my body and expose the entire country to my body and give people an opportunity to say goodbye. Right now, popular culture is really turning away from death. It's very death denying. But if the Kardashians, if one of those Kardashians were to pass away and they said, I want my makeup artist, I want my embalmer, and I want to be put on a plane and flown to different cities so that people could come and witness my service and be there to pay respects, I guarantee you people would start embalming again, and they would be requesting it at funeral homes all over the place. So it's important to remember the people in our community, as far as like public figures, actresses, actors, all those people. Right now, most times people will choose either a closed casket or they choose to cremate the body. And that has a really, really profound impact on the way that we as consumers purchase funeral products and services.
And it was interesting when Aretha Franklin died, and she had an open casket. And in fact, she had costume changes over the several days.
Yes, yes, yes. And I believe people were obsessed with it. They wanted to be able to see her in her casket. And I do think there is a morbid curiosity for people, but it's also closure for people, because a lot of times, especially now with social media, we begin to have relationships with people that we never meet in person. I mean, look at you and I consider you a really great friend and a colleague that I know I could call at any time, but we've only met in person, once or twice?
Once, yeah.
One time.
Yeah.
And so, and I have friends that I really do have, like I consider having a close relationship with them that I've never met before, because, we have this social media connection.
Yeah.
But I do think that really does sway people on the choices that they make when it comes to end of life services. So pretty profound, and it's interesting to think about.
Yeah. So let's look at some of your equipment that you've got there in the Cold Hand Death Education Studio.
Okay, I think one of the most, I guess, one of the most popular tools that I use in the prep room whenever I'm talking online or educating the consumers, the public, or students, is that people are really surprised to find out that I use an airbrush. And so this is an airbrush that we use for airbrush makeup. It's used, movie stars, special effects, and embalmers use it as well. And it's not something new. It's been used for, over 10, 15 years in our industry. It's still considered, even though it's been around for that long, it is still considered a high profile, innovative tool in the prep room. Not very many, I think, morticians are trained on it. But the ones that are trained on it and the ones that do use it, I mean, I've gotten really some amazing results, especially on infants and men. So we do use the airbrush makeup. And here's some of my, we have a color wheel, right? So this is what we learn in color theory in mortuary college. So I do have my color wheel. It's a pocket color wheel that I keep. And here's a really interesting tool that I have, and it's a prosthetic. And so it's an ear. It's an actual prosthetic ear.
Oh
In
my.
case someone is missing an ear, I got one in my pocket.
So when with the color wheel, I think one thing that maybe people don't realize is that when we're alive, and I guess when we're dead, we just have a natural undertone that's either kind of reddish or yellowish. And so do you use that to help color the person?
I personally don't use my color wheel anymore. I mostly keep this in the studio when I'm educating other people, but I really do allow myself a pretty wide avenue to experiment with color. So I don't necessarily use a color wheel. I use it as a general kind of foundation for trying to color match. But for the most part, I color match people by simply getting, the makeup, and I will look at their skin. I'll look at their photograph. I'll get 2 colors, and I will mix the colors right into my airbrush pot right there. Okay. So the one thing I do, kind of a fascinating and interesting fact, is that women typically will have a darker hands than their face. So when I'm teaching classes on cosmetics, especially mortuary cosmetics, I do teach that to my students. I say, make sure that you understand that women have typically their face is going to be lighter than that of their hands, and it's different for men. But can you maybe guess why that is?
Circulation? I don't know.
Well, let's think about how we live our life, right?
Don't put sunscreen on your hands necessarily.
Right. So 90% of cosmetics that we buy from the store, or online, or wherever you get your cosmetics, 90% of cosmetics has sunscreen in it. So women are applying sunscreen to their face daily, typically, and a lot of us do forget to put it on our hands. So sometimes there is, a color difference between the hands and the face for people who wear makeup. So
do you try and balance that out?
I try to make them look how they did in life.
Okay.
So if their skin is, lighter, I try to make them match, because typically most people will try to match, or women will go ahead and they'll just match their face. So they'll be a little bit lighter, putting a little bit darker bronze on the hands to show that difference. But I really do try to go by the photograph to make that person look as much as I can like they did in life.
And that's why so many funeral directors ask for a recent photo of the deceased.
Yes.
So you can do your work and make them look like they did in life. Yes.
Exactly.
So what about the equipment that's behind you? That's very much involved with the process before you get to the makeup. It
is. So are you talking about my embalming machine?
Yes.
Yes, this is our embalming machine, which is actually on loan. It was donated by one of my clients here in Arizona who is supporting our education program. So they've let us use their embalming machine, and we're thankful to them. But yes, this is the bad mamma jamma right here. This is really what makes things happen for families. And without it, we'd still be using gravity bongs like they did on the battlefield. So innovation, technology, using electricity, all that has come a long way. And we're able to mechanically pump the embalming fluid with this machine. And you can see the hose hanging to the side that we attach into the carotid artery, I should say on this side, right? The carotid artery, and push that embalming fluid through the arterial system into the capillaries and remove all the blood and pull the blood out of the body and down the drain.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that that's what happens. And in the Jewish tradition, the blood is considered a part of the body to stay in the body. So Jews generally do not get embalmed, or Muslims as well. So when you're doing that, before you actually embalm, don't you wash the body?
That's right. So remember I talked about the 3 aspects of embalming, which disinfection is the first part of embalming, and it is probably the most important part besides the actual preservation. Disinfection is the most important part of embalming. And then we have number 2, the actual preservation, where the fluid is actually imparted onto the body. But that disinfection process involves a thorough washing of the body. And however, some cultures and religions might not arterially embalm and add chemicals to the body to preserve, almost all religions do a washing, which people, I think, get confused a lot of times. They think, oh, we're going to wash the body, but it's actually a disinfection process. So by washing the body, which can be considered ritualistic, right? That's part of the ritual, but there's also a purpose to it. There's a reason, there's science behind it, is that when we wash the body, we remove the odor-causing bacteria, any of the bacteria that's going to encourage the decomposition process. We wash that away from the body. So it's much like washing your hands. You know, you wash your hands for that reason, to get rid of that bacteria, the soil, the dirt, anything that's left over. And so the disinfection process itself, just bathing the body and washing and disinfecting, is going to slow down the decomposition process. It's not going to slow it down significantly. I want to make that point clear. Okay, really what slows down the decomposition process is embalming. The preservatives that we put into the body. Okay, refrigeration, right? Any type of preservation, but it will definitely, it plays a big part in the embalming process. After we disinfect, we wash the body, right? We remove the blood, or sometimes we don't, but if we can, we do remove that blood, get rid of the blood, replacing it with preservative. Then comes the restoration part, where the cosmetics come into play.
Now, wait a minute. We skipped part of this about the internal organs that harbor the bacteria that get removed with a trocar. That's kind of a gory detail, but it's
not really, because it really isn't. It's actually a really important part of the process, and a lot of people don't know that it can be used on unembalmed bodies as well. And there is value in that. I definitely, like, I teach in my class, I have an eco-friendly treatments for unembalmed remains class that I teach for professionals. And during that class, I do teach aspiration of the body. So what happens after someone dies is that bacteria it's going to continue to grow. And, you know, even though we die, right, the bacteria is still growing in our gut. Okay, so we have our intestines in there, they'll start to expand, the gases will start to expand. And that's why you see these pictures on the internet or in the movies where the person might be bloated, or a cow that's dead on the side of the road is bloated. It's from the gases that are building up. So the really valuable part of aspiration of the body is puncturing those organs to release the gas. Okay, if you release the gas, it's going to give it somewhere to go instead of just building in the body. So there is aesthetic to it. It's much like liposuction. It's very, very similar. So it's a very similar process to the process that plastic surgeons used during liposuction. So that's why, you know, people say, oh, it's so gory and this, not really. Like, people are doing this all over the country and they're alive and paying thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to have it done. So it is a very valuable process. It can be done during the embalming process, or for people that choose not to have embalming. It still is a valuable process to be able to slow down the decomposition process, and also give families a better viewing experience, because a lot of people don't realize, you know, that bloating is occurring, right? The stomach is expanding, the intestines are expanding, everything's expanding. All of the fluid that's in those organs are going to come up, or they're going to go down. It's just science. I mean, that's just how it works, right? So that's where embalmers become extra valuable for families, is that we can actually inhibit that process from happening, so that families can go in and they don't have to be worrying about that their loved one is going to be purging one way or the other.
Oh my God.
It's about dignity, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. So what about all of those different bottles that are lined up on the shelf behind you?
Oh yeah, so this is my arsenal. This is my arsenal. We use a vast variety, at least I do, different chemicals to treat the body. So everyone, I think there's a common misnomer that people have that everyone is treated with the same chemical. And that's simply not true. Every person is unique, right? We're all unique in our own special way. We're created perfectly by our maker. And that includes, just like when you go to the dentist, you have special treatment that's done on your teeth. If you go to the doctor and you have surgery, whatever, that surgery is going to be specific to like your body's needs. And that's exactly how embalming is. It's post-mortem surgery. And a lot of people don't realize that, but it is a surgical process. And during that surgical process, you may have special needs. Each body has special needs. For example, I think one of the things that I see most nowadays, and I live in a big city, so we get a lot of cases from the hospitals. People go to the hospital and they die in the hospital. And many times doctors and nurses, their job is to save lives. However they can, that's their job. And with pharmaceutical companies, the way that they have been producing all of these life-saving medications and drugs, they're being forced to use those medications and pharmaceuticals on the bodies. What people don't understand is that when all those pharmaceuticals are used in the body and those organs begin to shut down, they have to go somewhere. And they typically spill out into the interstitial tissues of the body, which creates bloat. And it's edema. It's basically water that is not being processed anymore by, the urinary tract or the vital organs. So it ends up, I'm sure you maybe had a friend or someone that you love in your life that you've gone to visit at the hospital and you can see, gosh, they're really swollen. Maybe you've gone to a funeral and you've seen someone that's like, gosh, they don't look like themselves. They're really swollen. Well, bless the doctors and the nurses. We love them for all that they do. And, but in that process, a lot of times that's what happens. So when I get a body like that, I use special chemicals back here, right? I make literally, it's like kind of like being a bartender. I get my special cocktail for that person and whatever their needs are. And I will make a very special solution, a preservative solution for that particular body. So somebody that's really ill coming out of the hospital in that type of scenario, I'm going to use different chemicals than I would a small infant.
Right. So, for example, one friend of mine had told me about her father who had died, had jaundice and was very wizened. And the embalmer did some magic that, removed the yellow in the skin and the eyes and was able to plump up the person. And in this case, you were talking about reducing the swelling of a person.
Right. So yeah, there is the opposite process, right? We have somebody that may be jaundiced or they're older, emaciated, older folks. A lot of times when they're going through the dying process, they will lose an immense amount of fluid through the dying process. And as an embalmer, we're able to rejuvenate, which is also plump up. I like to use the term rejuvenate that person and bring them back to a more vital appearance, but by using the humectant types of chemicals that we use, which is completely different than the last case I talked about, right? When you have a jaundiced person, we can use chemicals as well to it's called a capillary wash or a vascular flush. And it's basically a pre-injection that we do to the body before we ever add any type of preservation. We basically flush out the plumbing. Like that's how I like to talk about it. We flush out the plumbing, right? We flush out the clogs. And I like to refer to it as that sometimes, is that our arterial system is clogged with pharmaceutical waste, perhaps, that has been, applied through applied into the saline drips, or if that person, their organs began to shut down, they may be backed up. Okay. And so the liver and the pancreas and all of those organs are basically backing up, and all of those toxins are going, that bilirubin it's going back into the body and turning the person yellow or green. So with our capillary wash and our vascular flush, we can really push a lot of that out. Sometimes it's really successful and sometimes it's not. It's really a crapshoot. But if I have a case where I can't flush all the jaundice out, that's what I have my airbrush for.
Ah, okay. Cover it over.
Yeah, and it's so it's such a it's full coverage makeup because it was intended for special effects. And you know, this particular machine was first used in Hollywood for people that were doing news reporters and actresses and people that needed that heavy makeup coverage. So that's when we like realized as embalmers, oh, this is really valuable and we can use this on people that have discolorations, post-mortem stain, which is that very deep purple and black, someone that has taken a fall and perhaps they have, you know, a black spot or a black eye. And then also people who have jaundice, we can cover that up and you will never know that it's even there.
Mm-hmm. I remember visiting one of the funeral director conventions and seeing these three faces lined up on a table to show jaundice and I guess darker skin and lighter skin. I'll put that photo up. So it really sounds like what you do is both a science and an art.
It really is. I think that's really, and I throw that around a lot on my social media so that people really understand, because I think for the most part, the general public doesn't really understand what we do. They don't understand what my job is. And it's a shame, and it's great that there's programs like this. So thank you for putting this out there for families and the public so that they can really learn what embalming is and what the benefits are and if it's right for them. Like you said, they may be really interested and be like, wow, you know, I would really love that for my family, but is it right for my family? You know, is your religious belief going to conflict with the process? Or, you know, maybe you're thinking, I just want cremation and I don't want really any of that. But then somebody watching this might be like, wow, I didn't even know that was possible. You know?
Well, and it's true, you can have a funeral with the body and have it on view. Even if somebody is choosing cremation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does the embalming affect the actual process of cremation?
Such a great question. It's such a great question. I think it's a really common question that people have. Embalming is never going to affect cremation in any way, shape, or form. As a matter of fact, it's really common for families to embalm have their loved one embalmed and have a viewing and then have cremation follow, because that person may have wished their last wishes were to be cremated and they didn't want to be put into the ground. So I think it's important for families to know that they don't have to just simply, the person dies and they go straight to the crematory. Just because someone wants cremation doesn't mean that there aren't options. There's actually a long list of options between the time of passing and cremation, and embalming can absolutely have a place in there for sure.
Mm-hmm. And the viewing and the funeral.
Everything. You can have it all.
So when we talk about the history of cremation, and battlefield cremation process was by gravity, and also was just adding different chemicals to the body. They didn't drain the blood
right
originally.
Right.
So what kind of developments and changes have you seen in the embalming process that you think people should know about?
Well, yeah, I think one of the most important innovations that I'm very happy to be a part of and excited to be a part of is the movement of plastic surgical techniques into our space. So as you know, plastic surgery now it's popular. People do it all over. It's not just for the rich and famous anymore. Women and men are getting Botox injections, Juvederm injections in sleepy little towns all over our country and all over the world. And it's more common now that you hear people, you know, saying that they have Botox injections. Like everybody gets it. It's so what that has done is it's created a higher standard right? For us embalmers, now there's even more pressure on us than there was before. So keeping up with those expectations that families have, how many women get breast implants now? How many women and men get tummy tucks? This is all relevant. I mean, when it comes to like the way people look and the amount of money that they spend on cosmetics and plastic surgery and all that, it's relevant to like what we're doing. So you're going to start to see more of that in the future. I teach a couple of different classes that have it's like post-mortem plastic surgery techniques. One of the classes that I teaches hair implantation for people who have had an accident and they've had their hair shaved off. And that hair is actually taken from the back and grafted into the front. So that's a new technique that's really stems from plastic surgery that is making its way into the embalming room, and how it's really making an impact on how families are viewing their loved ones. And I think in the future, if you stick around and you continue to follow my work, you'll start to see that there is an opportunity for a postmortem tummy tuck.
Are you doing Botox injections and like
funeral directors and embalmers have been offering rejuvenation through injection into facial features since the beginning of time. Since we started in this industry, we've had feature builder, which we use in the face. It's just that funeral directors and embalmers haven't quite learned how to market their skills. So, people don't know that we can offer this. I let all my families know. I actually let my families know that they have the opportunity for facial rejuvenation process. And you can, bring someone, like, you can take off 10 years very easily with the injection process. And, we can plump people's lips. We can, get, these jowls right here that we all we start to hate that when we get older. I can plump that up. Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We can do a postmortem liquid facelift. Absolutely, not a problem.
So how about on the other end of the spectrum, people who are concerned about green issues? They want to be as, return to the earth as naturally as possible. It seems like embalming might be contraindicated for those people.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of propaganda on the internet about that, and people don't, because they don't understand embalming. They don't really understand how the chemical process works. And so they just think chemicals bad. But what a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of chemicals they're natural. So formaldehyde is a naturally occurring chemical in our environment. As a matter of fact, our own bodies produce it. If you boil cabbage long enough, it'll produce formaldehyde, okay?
Maybe that's why it smells the way it does.
Yeah, it's a natural chemical. So and what a lot of people don't realize is that once formaldehyde comes in contact with protein, which is blood, right? Muscles are protein. The formaldehyde returns back to its natural state, and it's really rendered harmless. It's not going to do anything to the environment. So all the people that are complaining about this is affecting our soil and it's affecting this and it's affecting that, it's just simply not true. And I know that's hard to believe. When I first learned this, it took me a really long time to process that. And I'm like, well, how is that? That's not possible. That's not true. I'm around these chemicals in the prep room. I have to wear a gas mask. How is that not harmful to the environment? But it's because I didn't understand the process and the chemical molecular change that happens when the embalming fluid comes in contact with protein. And it just completely changes. So I think the more where we should be focusing more on as far as protecting the environment, protecting people. Those are the living people, the employees, the staff, the embalmers that are actually working with these chemicals. Not the families. Families aren't going to be exposed to it once they're up at the casket. It's completely irrelevant at that point. It's irrelevant, all the blood and the embalming fluid that goes down the drain. No different than any hospital or any other, water processing plant or any of these, all of that stuff goes down the drain. And keep in mind, formaldehyde is a disinfectant. That's another thing that's really difficult for people to understand. Formaldehyde is a very powerful disinfectant. So basically, you're pushing disinfectant down the drain, which is going to disinfect the soil and its surrounding areas anyway. So it's hard because there's just so much propaganda about its environmental impact and whatnot. And unfortunately, the chemical companies have chosen to stay out of that conversation. I feel like because they feel like it's a never-ending battle, like they're not going to win it. People have, like, they're going to think what they're going to think, and you can't change people's mind. Understanding that molecular process is chemistry, and chemistry is really intimidating for a lot of people. So I try to tell people the truth. I just tell them this is the truth, and you can decide to accept the truth or say, no, I don't believe that, but that's how it works.
So if someone was embalmed and then put into a vault that would enclose everything, I think people are getting into the resource use of metal and concrete
Caskets.
and caskets. Yeah.
Well, you can embalm a person and put them straight into the ground. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's completely, it's natural. You can do that. So I do, I don't want to step on any toes with the casket industry, but yeah, I think those metals, they may be, we're taking up space and whatnot, right? With those metals and the space and cemeteries and whatnot. But I feel like for me personally, and this is just my personal view, I appreciate that we have dedicated areas like cemeteries where bodies are able to be preserved and held, because to me, that's part of our history. And I myself, I am a hardcore tapophile. I love visiting cemeteries. I love visiting arboretums. That's the one place that I can really find peace. And I'm such a history nerd that I really love to go into those cemeteries and see the beautiful architecture from the markers, those historical markers, to read the life stories of those people when they were born and when they passed, and to just kind of imagine like what life would be like back then. The more and more that we moved into this era of not leaving your carbon footprint, to me, it's sad because it erases our history. Like there's going to be generations of people who we won't ever know anything about their life here, because it's all going to be digital. Everything's digital. There's no place to go visit and see like, wow, this is how people lived their life back then. I went to, during the pandemic, while they were taking down all the monuments in Memphis, I went there because I was worried that they were going to take down the monuments of the cemeteries, because they do have those Civil War cemeteries there and the Confederate cemeteries. And I was really thankful to find that they didn't dismantle those monuments. They dismantled so many, but they didn't dismantle the ones that were at the cemeteries. I think people don't know they exist. But whatever your view is on that, it is really, really, really impactful to go to a cemetery like that and see all of these soldiers that passed in the Civil War, to see it on both sides, just to see how many people, seeing is believing. When somebody can tell you one thing and you can read it or whatever, but when you actually see it and you're there, it's powerful. And I have visited many, many cemeteries, and that cemetery, when I went there, I have never had an overwhelming feeling of grief like I did when I went there. It brought me to my knees. It literally brought me to my knees. The feelings that I had when I was there, it's like I could feel all of that pain and turmoil and confusion. And I think we're going to lose that. The more that we're trying to erase our carbon footprint, right? We're erasing our history too.
Absolutely. I'm also president of the historic Fairview Cemetery, established in 1881 here in Albuquerque. And our nonprofit organization that is helping to preserve as best we can the cemetery and to share the history of the people buried there. I was amazed to find actually a Confederate soldier marker out here in Albuquerque.
Yeah.
And he was a guy from Alabama, and he was in an Alabama regiment, and he had the pointed headstone. That's how you can tell the difference between the Confederates and the Union has a rounded top. I've heard that the reason for the pointed top was so that no damn Yankee could sit on their gravestone.
It's amazing though, right? This
Yeah.
history, the history behind it, the thought and the emotion that goes into those markers. So as much as I am, like, I really am I try to keep a paperless household. Like, I don't use paper towels in my house, or I minimize the amount of use of paper towels in my house. Like, that's the one thing that I can do, right? So I don't use paper products. I don't use paper plates. I don't use, like I said, paper towels, paper napkins. I don't use plastic forks and spoons in my house. And I recycle all of our, the paper that comes in. I recycle all that. Any type of plastic, I recycle it. And my family thinks I'm nuts, but I really do. And that's my way of being able to, like, be a part of that green movement, right?
Mhm.
But people, like, a lot of times, like, well, you must be like the opposite of that because you're an embalmer and you're putting all these chemicals in the ground. And I really wish that the chemical companies would get on board and start educating people, because in other countries, embalming has become illegal. So there are whole countries where it's illegal to embalm, and now the embalmers are struggling, trying to find, stuff to use so that they can help these families and preserve bodies in a way that, it's going to be helpful to the family. And it's really sad. I hope that doesn't happen here in the United States, but unfortunately, I feel like our ancient dark art is under attack. I really do. And I don't know if it's gonna live through the next 30 years.
Wow. Well, and one of the other issues that our country is facing is unclaimed cremated remains.
Yes.
With this pandemic that
And bodies.
and bodies.
Full bodies. Funeral homes are stuck with full bodies. Yeah. It's cremated remains and full bodies. It's a real thing. And it's sad because funeral homes don't really talk about that, because it's a very easy, I think, conversation for the media to spin. And it makes the funeral homes look bad, when actually the funeral homes are the ones that are the victim in that type of case, because people do just abandon their loved ones like that. If they don't have money and they don't want to deal with it, they will abandon their loved one. And I've seen it happen. It's happened to me as a funeral director before. Yeah, it's terrible. And it creates, not only because, we can't legally do anything to that body. If someone abandons a body in my care, I can't legally embalm them. Embalming is going to prevent the odor, right? It's going to stop the odor in its tracks. It's going to prevent decomposition from occurring, which is, that process is messy. The decomposition process is messy. And what that created in my facility was a biohazard problem for my staff, because now I have this body that was abandoned that I couldn't embalm, disinfect, right, and make safe for my staff. So now my staff is having to be exposed to this decomposing body and work in that environment. And that's not fair.
Well, doesn't refrigeration help?
Yeah, but the body is still going to continue to decompose. And so the body was being held in our refrigeration unit, but it's every day somebody has to go in there and mop underneath the body, because that body is continuing to break down and turn into fluid. And, that's what happens. It's natural. That's the natural process. So someone has to go in there. As if the body was embalmed, that's not going to happen. It's going to stay intact. But because there was no embalming that was authorized, every day we'd have to go in there, and that body bag was getting more full and more full of more fluid, and the odor was so bad, that no one should have to be exposed to that. No staff member should have to be exposed to that. It's not fair to the staff and the funeral home. So I wish, and it's hard for funeral directors to talk about that, because it gets into the media and then it's like, oh, they have this body and they're storing it there in an undignified manner. No, what else are we supposed to do? We don't have any rights to be able to treat the body or to go and have the body cremated. Can't do that. Without legal permission from the family, I can't take a body to get cremated.
So
So
what do you do then with that body?
you have to hold on to it. You basically start a legal process with the state, but it takes months to a year. I mean, it's not something that happens fast. This is a deceased person, like somebody's, like you can't just cremate somebody. You can't just put them in the ground. Like there is a legal process that you have to follow. And there is a vast majority of amount of people that are abandoned. So it's not like you're dealing with just one person.
No, it's like tens of thousands of people.
Yeah. So
mind-boggling.
it is a process. You have to prove, as the funeral director, it's a lot of work, like legal paperwork and whatnot, because you have to prove that the body is abandoned. And there is a process, right? You have to make public announcements for so many weeks to months. You have to pay as the funeral director. I have to pay to put that announcement in the newspaper. And how expensive obituaries are now.
Yeah.
Okay. So an ad, right? We pay to put an ad or an obituary in the paper saying this person has died, and you have the opportunity to come forward because in 90, 120 days or whatever the days are, we have to move forward with this process. And it's difficult to be able to prove that the body has been actually abandoned, because most times 99.99999% of the time, there is family that is responsible for the body. They're choosing not to be. So it's not that the body is unclaimed. It's that the family has actually abandoned them. So that we have to go down this now. You have to get the police involved and get all these. It's this huge process. Meanwhile, the person is in the prep room, the deceased person, and decomposition is doing its thing. It's doing its normal thing that it's supposed to do, which is to break down the tissues of the body and return back to dust, right?
Ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
Yeah, but it's a long process. It's not like, immediately to dust. No. I mean, that process, it's messy, and it does take a long time to be able for that to happen. But it's interesting as a funeral director dealing with a case like that. It was very frustrating.
Wow. And there was just an article I saw in the newspaper about unclaimed cremated remains being buried actually in the Phoenix area. And
lawfully?
We have it here in New Mexico. It's everywhere. Yeah.
So they were lawfully being placed? Yeah. So yeah, funny, I just read, I try to follow up with the statutes and stuff, and I was reading the statutes of like who can do that legally, right? Next of kin and whatnot. And as a funeral director, what my rights are if I do get, kind of stuck with cremated remains. And one thing that people don't realize is that veterans, like if a veteran is abandoned like that, we can actually contact the VA and they will place the veteran at no cost to the funeral director or the family or anyone. So we did when I used to be a cemetery manager, and we would have pretty much on a monthly basis, we would have people that would leave cremated remains at our cemetery gate.
Just drop them off? Wow.
Yeah, unfortunately. But
well, and here in New Mexico, in Albuquerque, the Bernalillo County has a program where unclaimed cremated remains, like they hold on to them for, I'm thinking about 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And then they're buried in a special area. There are different cemeteries that have taken this on, where they have put the boxes of the cremated remains in like one casket all together.
Yep.
But then the names of those people are recorded. Yep. And so if somebody does finally say, whatever happened to that person?
Yeah, which it does.
Yeah,
it does happen down the road. And that's what we did at our cemetery as well, is that we had a place for those unclaimed remains or abandoned remains. And, those remains that would get left at the gate. And we did have a space there in the cemetery. And it's unfortunate because, for a number of different reasons, but from a business aspect, it's unfortunate because those spots are being taken by, they're unpaid. Mm-hmm. And so you know, that those are spots that are valuable. It's valuable real estate and property. And so it's unfair, I think, you know, as a business owner, it's unfair that people do that. I don't think it's right. And I want to make sure and convey that, like, don't do that. If you're watching this, don't abandon your loved one. Like, there's so many options. There's so many things that you can do, right? I mean, you know this.
Yeah.
There's so many ways to memorialize a loved one. And there's ways that, you know, the scattering is like a really popular thing for people now. And that may be an option for a family like that.
And if that person is a veteran, you know, make sure you know where that DD 214 piece of paper is, the discharge paper, because that does give both the veteran and their spouse burial rights, either in a national cemetery or state veteran cemetery.
Yeah. And even if you can't find the DD-14, you know, contact your local funeral director. They can help you. And you can, even as a family, if you're someone who's not in funeral industry and you don't want to deal with a funeral director, you can contact the VA yourself and they will track that person down. It may take a while, but they will find that person. They will track down that record of the DD-214. And I mean, I've never seen a veteran be turned away ever in my career.
Yes. Well, Monica, it's hard to believe, but we've been talking for almost an hour now.
That's how all our conversations go, right?
Yes, yes. If people wanted to get in touch with you, how can they find you online?
The best way to contact me online is to simply follow my Instagram. That's where I'm the most active. However, we do have a Cold Hands Facebook page and a Next Generation Mortuary Support business page as well. But the best place to find content about embalming is going to be on my Instagram page, which is @ColdHandsHosts, as I am hosting you here in my death education studio. I hope that you'll join me on Instagram and let me host you there as well.
Awesome. Well, Monica Torres, thank you so much for your insights. Great conversation here as part of the Before I Die New Mexico Festival.
Wish we could be there in person, maybe next year.
Yes, yes. The pandemic has thrown this whole industry for a loop and our whole society, but we're doing the best we can with what we got.
Well, good luck to you with the event and everyone that's joining today and the days following. I hope you absolutely enjoy the festivities, because we all know Gail puts all her heart into it. And I wish I could be there. And hopefully, like I said, next year, hopefully we'll be able to be there in person. So until next time, happy embalming.
Live long and prosper.